Evening everyone, I am back again with Chris Adams for our third video on the myths and truths of homelessness. Evening Chris.
Evening.
And tonight we thought we would discuss how being homeless affects people physically and psychologically when living on the streets and when living in cars. And to start with, because everybody's different and everyone's going to have different impacts, but it certainly does impact you psychologically and physically. If you could please summarise what sort of stages that you went through living on the streets, when you were living in sleeping on the ground, for instance, and the comparison to sleeping in the car. What sort of emotional trauma you went through, how you changed psychologically or physically, what sort of toll that took on your mental health and your physical health after having so long, like nearly 17 years or just over 17 years on the street. So this is a huge subject, Chris. It's if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you went through.
Well, first of all, welcome to anyone who may be watching. Good to be back in the room here. Like you said, being homeless affects everyone differently health-wise, whether it be your mental and physical health or your emotional health. We'll start with personally for me. When I first went out to the streets, the first aspect of my health that was affected was my emotional health. Due to coming from a position where I lost my father, when I came out to the street, the first thing I actually saw was the death of another person on the street. So I broke down and didn't cope at all within my first weeks on the street. But to talk about the physical health side of things, yeah, this is a long.
So how did you get over that? You just lost your dad, you found yourself on the street, and you weren't coping all that well. What did you do to cope, to get by?
I didn't cope at all. I actually ran with my tail between my legs, as to say, and headed for a safer location. I knew I was in the city. I got on the first bus and came back to Modbury because for me that was home, and that was the only coping mechanism I had to try to come back home and find some sort of support here. But when I got home, I had no support, and it was actually a stranger that approached me. I was quite upset, asked me what had gone on, and when I expressed what I had just experienced, that a woman had just died on my feet, because the woman actually died on my shoes. Gosh. And I was only about 2 weeks after my father had passed, and he said to me, you need to go back. He said, if you don't, you will probably never survive the streets in the city ever again. And that seems like a bit of a weird thing to say.
So you felt closer to your father here?
I did. I felt closer to my father back in Picture Gully. I left on the bus crying. I was traumatised. I was still suffering trauma from my father's death. And so I felt weird that was said to me, but I thought, I'll go back into the city. So I headed back to town again. And death is a funny thing. It's not something that you get over in a hurry. And so that affected me for quite some time, and I've never gotten over that. It's still the memories I have today of that first person. I'm able to tell that story to people like it happened yesterday. I've now experienced quite a bit of death on the city streets, and not just in Adelaide but around the country. Wherever I've gone, I've had person after person die. You see these people die, whether it be, I've had people who took their last breath in my hands. When you're holding their head as they're dying. I've had people who have literally just stood up in front of me and just gone over and died on the ground.
And these are homeless people?
These are homeless people, yes. Example, in Melbourne, I was sitting in a back alleyway behind Elizabeth Street, and a gentleman I was sitting right next to, he stood up and he just fell forward and his head smashed on the ground and he died right there. I had another homeless gentleman next to me who grabbed my shoulder and he said, time to go, time to go. And I couldn't move. I could not fathom what I was again seeing in front of me. After seeing so many people die already, at this stage I think I had witnessed 6 to 8 people die. And so it was still affecting me so adversely that I couldn't fathom it. I knew I had to stand, but I couldn't stand. And so he grabbed me and stood me up and walked me across the street. And I watched him across the street as the ambulance came and they covered the guy up and took him away. And so it lives with you, whether you've been...
Well, apparently there's the statistics of people on the street dying are quite high. Somebody's saying, can you place the microphone closer to the speaker? Yeah, I'm worried my phone's going to overheat too. Chris, is it a chance you could speak up a little bit more?
Yeah, probably had last time with my speaking. Apologies.
Just try to speak up a little louder. Yeah.
So I suppose I don't want to repeat all that.
No, you go
keep
for
going
it.
from where I am. Watching people die on the street has an adverse effect, and that's part of the ongoing post-traumatic stress disorder that you will live with. It's something that sticks with you forever. The memories. What you're saying is that it's learned behaviour, or for a better sense, you can't unsee what you have seen.
No.
You can't unlearn what you have learned.
Yeah.
And so for all the people that you will watch die on the street, they will stay in your memory for life.
Yes.
It's not something that will go away.
Well, it's a traumatic experience, let's face it.
Well,
I mean,
it is.
Having somebody pass away right there with you, it is.
So that's the emotional side of things. And there are other emotional side of things for your health. And some of these things I'm not sure I really want to say to the listeners out there. You might go through periods of, I think the word might be incontinence. You for a better sense, you wake up, apologies, I'll just have to say it, throwing up on your blankets. Unfortunately, having your bowels or let go in your swag, things like that, and these are all side effects of the trauma, of being out there on the streets. So that's the emotional toll that it takes. And there's also the fact that the emotional toll it takes of just being on the street. Like what we talked about last time, accepting your lot in life, that takes an emotional toll. Yep. Apologies, I'm trying to gather my thoughts on this. This is a conversation. I hadn't quite thought this through all the way, but as we speak about it, things like having to wait for your sleeping spot to become available to you, and to explain that to anyone who might be listening, I was sleeping in Civic Park before I got my car. Now, I had to sit there each night until 11 p.m, sometimes midnight, waiting for people to leave a church. Now, when you're sitting out in the cold and, it could be 2 or 3 degrees by 11 o'clock midnight and you're sitting there, something like that also takes an emotional toll, not just a physical toll, but an emotional one, where you start having serious doubts about, your worthiness of staying in this world any longer. And you start questioning yourself, going like, I may as well just go and do away with myself somewhere, because it's just simply become too cold and you become too miserable. Now, that misery, this leading to a point, the day-to-day misery that you go through living out on the streets, that's where it starts to take its true emotional toll. The longer you're out there, the worse things get.
I imagine there'd be a lot of self-hatred, a lot of feeling not worthy.
It is. It's not self-hatred.
And feeling as if you don't fit.
You never fit anymore. That comes from, as we discussed last week, of walking down the street and eventually turning into somebody who screams at everybody because everybody's staring at you. Yeah. And so that's the never fitting thing. You're never going to fit. And even once you get housed like this, you never quite fit back into the community. You can walk through a shopping centre and you will always know that the people that you're walking around in, they don't understand. You see things differently to everybody else. That like we spoke of last week. that comfort they have of having their home and having their drink by their bed. You know, they're just going about their day. And you will forever see things differently. It will never be the same again. You know, like I said last week, going to a friend's house and they don't understand what you've been through.
Is it important for you? Is it important for you to help people understand?
It's very important to try to help people understand, but that's extremely difficult task to try to make people understand. You know, or not make them understand, because you don't want to make people understand. You hope that they will understand and maybe start to reflect on what homelessness really is and how it affects a person. And then that internal affect their behaviour on how they go out and treat a homeless person.
So did you feel like a failure?
Oh, of course, I still feel like a failure. I haven't lived up to who I believed I was going to be. I had a preconceived notion when I was younger of where I was going to be at different stages of my life. And I thought by now I would be in a position in my life that I'm still not in, because I'm now trying to rebuild my life. But, you know, talking of physical health implications, as you know,
I know you suffered a lot of physical health complications.
Having something like epilepsy, I'm epileptic. Now, it's so hard living on the streets and having epilepsy. This is something that I always considered would kill me on the street. To be out there alone at night and have a seizure and have nobody around.
Well, that'd be terrifying.
It's quite a terrifying thing, because if you're lying there and you're smashing your head against the ground. And there's nobody to help. You could lie there and die.
Yes.
And I was
or be vulnerable to you know, those evil people that are out there.
You can, and I was always so lucky that every situation where I had seizures, it was a fairly public area and I had people around. You know, so that was one physical health aspect for me that has never gone away. And I wasn't able to take my medication on the street. Now I have my medication stored here, but I'm not able to have that on the street because it's something that in the heat, the sodium valproate tablets, they are temperature dependent. You need to have them in a cold environment. Out in the heat.
And of course you can't do that on the street, can you?
No, you can't. So you put a box of tablets in your bag, and within a few hours they've started to melt.
Yes.
And they go all gooey. And so your medication isn't something that you can have, so that is something that will then, without your medication, without a load in your system, because epilepsy builds up as a load, you will then find yourself having seizures. And once you're back on your meds, you know, after 3 or 4 months, those seizures start to subside and they become more irregular. And as long as you're in the right conditions, you know, you're happy and you're well adjusted, your seizures are not so often as they were. But another health aspect for me physically, the bowel obstruction that you know that I suffered from. And even now it's not great, but out on the streets, not having access to that toilet, you know, and not having access to the medications that I needed, and that's more. So I should have said I required medication to keep my bowel open. And that would have required me being close to a toilet 24 hours a day.
Excuse me, Debbie, yes, we are going to have the link up, and it will also be available on YouTube for you to finish watching later on.
So we're back here now?
Yep,
right.
Sorry. Lady's really interested, but she's got to rush off, so...
So the bowel obstruction was one thing that I was also very terrified of.
Well, how? Well, yeah, because, you know, the lack of facilities for a start.
Well, that's exactly right, but more the lack of facilities to be able to have the medication, and for doctors in a hospital to tell you that without the medication that you would potentially face within 12 months, you know, no longer being here. And that you would simply, they would have no other option after 6 months but to open you up and manually remove it. But if the surgery couldn't be done, that you simply didn't stand a chance at all. You know, so that was another terrifying physical health implication. But there are the health factors that come into play that people don't realise, like being cold every night, you know, staying in the park when it's 2 or 3 degrees. And last winter, quite often at night by 11 o'clock the temperature had dropped to 2 or 3 degrees. And that's when you start to suffer, you know, what could potentially turn to, I think, hypothermia.
Hypothermic, yeah.
You know, you get so cold that you start shaking that you can't stop shaking.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and that really starts to eat away at you in the heat. To try to keep cool constantly in 38 to 43 degree weather, you find yourself drinking so much in the way of fluids just to try to keep yourself cool.
And hydrated,
to avoid dehydration,
yeah.
to keep yourself hydrated. And that's where I always said in summer, what we talked about last week with the begging, to give a person money, you are not going to be able to go to any charity and have them open for a long period during the day. Just an example, Hutt Street Centre closing at 1:30. Now, if you're in town,
why do they close at 1:30? That's crazy.
That's something that I'm unaware of why they close at 1:30. I'm guessing if it was a question that probably claims staff issues, you know, some sort of staff shortages. But it's something that everybody has always said. And as somebody who travelled interstate knows that the charities in state, or more the homeless services, I should label them as, in Melbourne, I'll just give a quick example. A place called Hosier Lane, it's called Youth Projects. It's a street, Hosier Lane, just off of Flinders Street. And the living room, which is Youth Projects, they open at 9 a.m. and they stay open till 5 p.m. So what that does, that gives you access longer to toilets and showers, you know, washing machines, but it also allows you a longer period to stay in the cool when it's hot weather, or to stay in the warm when it's cold weather, to keep out of the elements.
And that's why a lot of people go to the library or the shopping centres to keep cool.
That's good, that's exactly right. I found myself every morning on a cold morning in Civic Park, I would head straight to the plaza, and that relief you get from walking into Tea Tree Plaza and feeling the temperature change to warm your body back up again from being out in the cold. You know, and in the heat, when you're across, when I was staying in my car for those few months in Civic Park, the car became so hot that you started to feel unwell. You knew that there was a chance that you could pass out.
Heat stroke,
Yeah, it was heat stroke.
Yeah.
And so you head across to Tea Tree Plaza to stay cool. You know, but
come back to a really hot car later on.
That's right, you come back to an even hotter car later on.
Yeah.
And that was a huge issue I faced during the summer in the car. At night time, to be that hot in the car, so now this is a double-sided trap. Either you leave a window a little bit down, try to get some air in, but then you face the mosquitoes.
Yeah, oh yes.
So you put your windows up,
Yeah.
but then you face the stale warm air
Yeah.
and the intense heat that goes with that.
And of course the car's a lot, the temperature's like 10, 15
It is.
degrees hotter in the car than it is outside the car.
When it was 40 degrees, quite often it was 57, 58 in the car.
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
some older.
Yeah.
So that heat is enough to bring on heat stroke in a real hurry. You know, so there's a health implication there. So there's so many health implications, whether they be physical, psychological, emotional, you know, but then we want to talk of the psychological implications of being on the street. Now, there are so many psychological implications to being on the street, and the most common one is suicide. That is thought of by all homeless people, if not once, more than once, and it's quite a common.
Is it that, because there's different feelings here, where there's a feeling of helplessness and I really don't want to wake up tomorrow morning, I want this all to be over, compared to I'm really serious